Greens co-leader Russel Norman is heading into an election in a year with no shortage of issues. One of those is the controversial deep-sea drilling program off New Zealand's coast. Mr Norman is in Dunedin today and joins us. Good evening.
Good evening, Rebecca.
Now, the government's changed its rules in terms of consents for oil and gas drilling. They did that yesterday. What do you expect the effect of that to be?
Well, I guess it just means that New Zealanders are pretty much muzzled. So they've given people don't have the right anymore to make submissions for or against deep sea oil drilling. They just get the rubber stamp from the EPA. What
would the Greens do in terms of that legislation if they were in power?
Well, clearly we haven't supported the deep sea oil drilling program. That's because of the environmental risk, of oil spills like in the Gulf of Mexico, but also because of climate change. We've already discovered globally more fossil fuel reserves than we can afford to burn, and so we're much more focused on clean energy rather than dirty energy.
And again, if you were in power, how would you deal with companies that want to drill in our waters?
Well, I mean, Anadarko, who's one of those who's been drilling and was also involved in the Deepwater Horizon disaster, we would simply say to them, at this stage, we don't think it's worth it. But more importantly, we would put resource into the clean energy sector. So that's like particularly renewable electricity, but also looking at biofuels from woody waste. That's one of the options, and the electrification of the transport network, which is in terms of reducing greenhouse emissions where we're going to go, I think, with transport in the future.
Local businesses and the Chamber of Commerce here as well are very keen to see spin-offs from drilling in the region. What would you say to those people?
Well, I mean, the fastest growing sector in electricity globally is renewable energy. It's going to overtake gas as the second biggest source of electricity globally by the next 2 years, according to the International Energy Agency. So I would say that is that's where the future growth is going to be. And New Zealand has great opportunities there. We're world leading in some respects on renewable energy. And so that seems to me the kind of clean energy future where there's going to be money and jobs, and that's where the Greens think we need to grab our opportunities.
And what's the government doing at this stage?
Well, obviously the government's going in the opposite direction, so it's got a kind of 20th century energy policy, I guess I'd call it, which is all about fossil fuels. The year of fossil fuels is coming to an end because of climate change in particular, as well as rising prices. And so, the government strategy isn't going very well. I mean, most recently look at Bathurst Resources and their proposed coal mine. They've had to mothball that because of the price of coal. So, whereas renewable energy is going gangbusters.
John Key has been in Dunedin this past week selling the idea of his mixed ownership model. What are your thoughts on the results of that so far?
Well, it's from the point of view of the taxpayers, the cost so far is over $500 million. When you look at the cost of all the lawyers and all the share brokers, and then the missed opportunity in terms of the dividends that taxpayers are getting. Treasury always said that the taxpayers would be worse off by about $100 million a year in perpetuity because we don't get the returns on the assets, and basically the returns on the assets were greater than the cost of capital to the Crown. So whichever way you look at it, it's bad news for the taxpayer, but for, logically committed to it like John Key, I guess you push ahead regardless. But it has been a disaster from one end to the other, and I think that we would have been much better to hang on to those assets.
And finally, it's election year. What are the Greens doing to attract the votes?
Well, we'll be campaigning on our positive vision for a smarter, greener New Zealand economy, grabbing the opportunities that are there for New Zealand. We'll also be very focused on dealing with inequality. We've got tremendous child poverty in New Zealand. It's even worse than the government's been saying, 285,000 kids living in poverty now, so we'll be dealing with that. And then it's also about confronting the clear environmental issues such as our polluted rivers, cleaning those up, and dealing with climate change because New Zealand's emissions are growing rapidly. And if we're serious about the science of climate change, we need to get on top of that. So I think that's a much more positive vision for New Zealand as an independent nation with a cleaner, greener economy.
Greens co-leader Russel Norman, thanks very much for your time.
My pleasure.
After the break on 39